They stirred, sliced, and baked their way through chaos. And the food? Shockingly good. The 1920s weren't all glitz and jazz clubs. In tiny kitchens across America, people made magic out of almost nothing. Each one is a taste of a world we barely remember and shouldn't have forgotten. Let us start with something small, dainty, and weirdly powerful. Cucumber and cream cheese finger rolls. Sounds simple, right? But back in the 1920s, these were peak sophistication. We are talking crustless, rolled tight, and sliced into perfect little spirals like they were auditioning for a high society garden party. And they were. These sandwiches showed up anywhere a hat with a feather might be seen. Afternoon teas, bridge clubs, speakeasies running secret luncheons out the back door. The cream cheese was seasoned just enough to wake it up, usually with a little dill or chive, and the cucumber brought the crunch. What made them work was the effort people put into getting them just right. Sliced thin, rolled carefully, and chilled before serving. People used to stack them on platters like edible jewelry. They were the kind of thing you served when you wanted guests to remember your party, but not how they got home. And once you had one, you always reached for another. Of course, this was just one side of the table. Right next to it sat something much stranger. It jiggled, it sparkled, and believe it or not, it was made of ham. Now, ham mousse with pineapple glaze was not exactly a dish. It was more of a sculpture, a centerpiece, something that demanded a second look, if only to ask, is that meat? Yes, it was. Whipped ham mixed with gelatin, cream, and just enough seasoning to convince you it was fancy. It was molded into rings or domes, depending on how theatrical you were feeling that day, and finished with a glossy glaze made of pineapple juice and sugar. Some people even added maraschino cherries for flair. If it sounds unusual, that is because it was. But it was also kind of brilliant. You could stretch a small amount of meat into a showpiece, feed a crowd, and still have something sweet, salty, savory to talk about for days. And it worked especially well at church potlucks and ladies' luncheons where the goal was to impress and feed in that exact order. Just imagine everyone in pearls crowding around a jelly meat ring like it was the birth of Christ. And yet, somehow, it worked. But if mousse was not your thing, maybe you were more into something warm, creamy, and sitting proudly in a puff pastry shell. Chicken a la king was like the tuxedo of meals. Everything about it said you were doing just fine. Cubed chicken, sautéed mushrooms, and green peppers all folded into a silky cream sauce and ladled generously into golden pastry shells. The shell was the real move. It told guests that you took the extra step. This was the kind of meal served at hotel luncheons and bridge club dinners where the finger rolls were long gone and the women were gossiping with the kind of intensity usually reserved for political revolutions. It was rich, but not overwhelming. Filling, but still elegant. And the ingredients? Pretty simple. Leftover chicken, cream, maybe a splash of sherry if you had some stashed away from the night before. It was designed to stretch meat and still feel indulgent. You could eat it with a fork and knife or just lean in and scoop it all out like a savage. Nobody cared. You were winning either way. And if you wanted to impress someone, like really impress someone, you followed it up with dessert. Something light. Something whipped. Now listen, I know prunes get a bad rap today, but back then, prune whip was the belle of the dessert ball. It was a cloud of sweetness made from stewed prunes, sugar, and beaten egg whites. Sounds weird, tastes amazing. It was the kind of dessert that proved you could be both budget-conscious and bougie. There was no flour, no butter, just technique. You boiled the prunes down until they were soft and syrupy, then folded them into stiff egg whites like you were making a meringue with a secret. Once chilled, it became something you could spoon into a fancy glass, top with a mint leaf if you were feeling extra, and serve to your guests with a knowing smile. It was sweet, light, tangy, and perfect for hot evenings when no one wanted to touch an oven. Plus, it was healthy, or at least that is what they told themselves. That made it the rare dessert you could go back for twice and still feel like you were watching your figure. But hey, if you were craving something more golden, crunchy, and kissed by the sea, the next dish had you covered. Clam fritters with cornmeal crust were like little bites of the Atlantic, fried up in cast iron and served with whatever sauce you could throw together. These were especially popular in coastal towns where clamming was part of the weekend routine. You dig some up, clean them out, chop them into bits, and mix them with cornmeal, egg, and whatever spices you had lying around. Then you drop spoonfuls into a skillet and let the oil do its thing. They were crispy on the outside, soft and briny in the middle, and absolutely irresistible once they hit the plate. People dunked them in vinegar, mustard, even ketchup if they were feeling rebellious. And they were portable. You could pack a dozen in a napkin, bring them to the beach, or serve them with a side of pickles and call it lunch. No rules, just flavor. The best part? You could stretch a handful of clams to feed 6 people if you fried smart. That was the magic of the 1920s. And speaking of magic, the next dish somehow turned the simplest bird into a full-blown celebration, with gravy, dumplings, and the kind of smell that made the whole house feel like home. Brown chicken fricassee with dumplings was one of those meals that made the house smell like something good was always about to happen. This was Sunday dinner at its finest, where the chicken was not just cooked, it was respected. The meat was browned first in a heavy pan to lock in flavor, then slow simmered in a creamy, roux-thickened gravy that clung to every bite. It was warm, it was rich, it was patient. You did not rush a dish like this. And then, of course, came the dumplings. Fluffy, soft, and cooked right on top of the bubbling pot like they were steaming under a gravy-scented cloud. Families from coast to coast made this with whatever they had. Leftover vegetables, toss them in, a splash of canned milk, even better. This dish made people feel safe. It filled stomachs and silenced complaints in households that could not afford much else. And sure, it took a few hours to get just right, but you could not put a clock on comfort. What made it special was not just the taste, it was the tradition. You passed it down, you passed it around, and by the time the last dumpling disappeared, the world always felt a little more forgiving. But if your stomach was full and your soul needed something a bit more refined, maybe even glamorous, then the next dish might be your kind of vintage. Celery Victor. Sounds like a magician or a silent film actor, but nope, it is a salad. A very chilled, very marinated, very serious celery salad that came straight out of elite San Francisco dining rooms in the early 1900s. Now, do not get it twisted. This was not some limp, sad little stalk on a plate. This celery was blanched, just long enough to make it tender, then soaked in a tangy vinaigrette of vinegar, lemon juice, and a whisper of herbs. After a long chill in the icebox, it came out crisp, cool, and ready for the spotlight. Restaurants like the Saint. Francis Hotel swore by this dish, serving it to guests who probably just spent 2 hours deciding between pearl earrings or a feathered headband. It was clean, it was light, it was unapologetically fancy. And unlike a lot of heavy, rich dishes from the era, Celery Victor was a palate cleanser, something refreshing to balance out all the cream and fried goodness of the day. It was also shockingly easy to make at home, which is how it eventually ended up on regular dinner tables too. Just a little vinegar and chill time, and suddenly your celery was in a whole new tax bracket. And speaking of making the most out of what you had, up next is a dessert with no milk, no eggs, and somehow all the flavor you could ever want. Boiled raisin cake, better known to some as war cake, might sound like a punishment, but it was actually a triumph. Imagine baking a dense, spiced loaf that had no milk, no eggs, and no butter. Sounds impossible, right? Well, not in the 1920s. This cake was born out of necessity and perfected by mothers who could stretch 5 ingredients into a feast. The secret was in boiling the raisins with sugar, water, and spices like cinnamon and cloves until the whole kitchen smelled like Christmas came early. That thick, sweet raisin syrup acted as the base, giving the cake its chewy texture and rich flavor. No frosting, no frills, just pure nostalgic goodness. And it lasted forever. You could bake it on Monday and still be slicing off pieces by Friday with your morning coffee. It was a wartime staple, a Depression dessert, and a little miracle of resourcefulness. Some folks added chopped nuts or a dusting of powdered sugar, but most kept it simple. It was not trying to impress you. It was trying to fill you up and remind you that a little sweetness was still possible, even when times were tough. But if raisins are not your thing, maybe you would rather dive into something fried, crispy, and dripping in the kind of gravy that turns silence into applause. Codfish balls with salt pork gravy were born in New England, but somehow found their way onto breakfast plates all over the country. These were not your average fish cakes. No breadcrumbs, no fluff, just flaked salted cod, mashed potatoes, and seasoning, rolled into balls and fried until golden brown and audibly crunchy. And then came the magic touch: salt pork gravy. This was rendered pork fat thickened with flour and milk, poured generously over the fish balls like someone had finally figured out what heaven tastes like. The contrast was perfect. The salty gravy brought out the briny depth of the cod, and the crispy outside gave way to that soft, starchy middle. You could eat them with a fork or just go caveman style and pop them whole. These were weekday meals, Sunday suppers, and next day breakfast, because yes, you always made too many on purpose. People who had never even seen the ocean made codfish balls a kitchen staple, thanks to their affordability, their versatility, and, let's be honest, that gravy. They were the kind of dish that felt like it had been passed down in whispers from one generation to the next, and if you were lucky, they came with a side of something sweet, sticky, and slathered in cream cheese. Date nut bread with cream cheese filling was one of those sneaky treats that looked innocent enough until you took a bite and remembered why you never shared the last slice. It was dense, rich, and sticky in all the right ways, packed with chopped dates and walnuts that melted into the soft crumb like they had always belonged there. This was not some delicate tea cake. This was the kind of bread that held its own. Tea rooms and luncheonettes served it sliced thick with a generous smear of whipped cream cheese in the center, sometimes even sandwiched like a dessert version of a peanut butter and jelly. It was luxurious without being showy, sweet without being cloying, and it was perfect with a hot cup of coffee, the kind that stayed black and strong, just like the opinions of whoever baked it. Housewives, grandmothers, and diners across the country leaned into this recipe because it was reliable. You could wrap it in wax paper, bring it to a neighbor, or just hoard the loaf and call it self-care. It aged beautifully too, better on day 2, even better on day 3, if it lasted that long. But if you thought that was the most creative a salad could be, wait until you meet the version that dared to toss in marshmallows. The Waldorf salad already had a reputation for being classy. Apples, celery, walnuts, a touch of mayo. It was clean, crunchy, and polite, like a salad wearing its Sunday best. But sometime in the late 1920s, someone got bold. Someone added marshmallows. And let me tell you, it changed the game. This was the dawn of the sweet salad era, when dessert and side dish blurred lines, and no one asked too many questions. The marshmallows were usually small, soft, and mixed in with fruit cocktail or extra grapes. They gave the salad that airy, playful edge, making it a favorite at potlucks, picnics, and post-church lunches. Children suddenly liked salad. Adults suddenly remembered childhood, and everyone had seconds. Of course, this twist was not for purists, but for those who embraced it, the Waldorf with marshmallows became a symbol of fun in an era that was quickly turning serious. The creamy dressing held everything together, and with each bite, you got sweetness, crunch, and a whole lot of memory. And while this might not be everyone's first idea of elegance, back then it meant your family was creative, generous, and not afraid of a little flair. Speaking of flair, the next dish turned a simple fruit into a golden, glossy showstopper that stole the spotlight at every church social it touched. Pineapple upside-down cake was not just a dessert, it was an announcement. You pulled this out of a cast-iron skillet and you were making a statement. Yes, I do bake. And yes, you will remember this. The magic was in the flip. Slices of canned pineapple, caramelized in brown sugar and butter, got layered under a vanilla-rich cake batter and baked until golden. Then, right as it came out of the oven, you flipped it upside down onto a platter and hoped the fruit came with it. When it did, the result was sticky, sweet, and perfectly symmetrical. Those bright yellow rings, sometimes dotted with maraschino cherries, looked like something out of a magazine. And it was not just for looks. This cake was moist, dense, and soaked in flavor. It was beloved across the country, especially in church basements and community halls, where the cast iron skillets worked overtime and everyone wanted a second piece. You could make it ahead of time, transport it easily, and serve it warm or chilled. It was timeless before anyone called food that. A pineapple upside-down cake meant celebration. It meant someone's birthday, someone's retirement, or just that someone had a can of fruit they were finally ready to use. And after all that sweetness, we are going deep, really deep, into something savory, rich, and straight from the bones. Oxtail ragu is not the kind of dish you just throw together. It is the kind you commit to. A true Sunday meal, slow-cooked for hours until the meat falls off the bone and the broth turns into something between a sauce and a spell. Oxtail was cheap back then. Nobody wanted it. Too bony, too tough, too weird. Which is exactly why frugal families turned it into treasure. Brown it first. Really brown it. Let it sizzle until the kitchen smells like something important is happening. Then toss it into a pot with onions, carrots, celery, herbs, and enough time to make your neighbors jealous. The result? A stew that was thick, hearty, and layered with flavor. It was not fancy. It was practical. The tail gave up every ounce of collagen it had, thickening the dish without needing cream or flour. Some added red wine, others tomato paste. People gathered around for seconds, mopping up every bit with crusty bread or mashed potatoes. It was survival food with soul. And once the pot was empty, the bones picked clean, and everyone full, there was only one thing left to do. Wake up tomorrow and eat the leftovers. But if meat was out of reach, or just too much, there was always a humbler option waiting on the stove. A little golden, a little sweet, and built on corn. Cornmeal mush is one of those dishes that sounds like a punishment and ends up being pure comfort. This was the food of farmers, factory workers, and anyone who needed to stretch a dollar, especially in the 1920s. You start with cornmeal and water or milk. Stir it over heat until it thickens into something between porridge and polenta. That's it. But here's where it gets interesting. Some served it hot in bowls with a pat of butter and a drizzle of maple syrup. Others poured it into pans, chilled it overnight, and then sliced and fried it into golden cakes the next morning. Either way, it was delicious. The texture was soft but firm, the flavor mild but rich, and it stuck with you all day. It was also endlessly adaptable. And during lean times, it was the difference between going hungry and getting by. You made a pot and kept it on hand. It did not spoil fast. It did not require meat. And somehow, it always hit the spot. But if you were lucky enough to have a bit of protein lying around and did not mind a bold flavor, the next dish was the ultimate throwback to old-school American grit. Liver and onions with bacon drippings. That is not just a meal. That is a commitment, a declaration that you are not here for avocado toast. Liver, especially calf or beef liver, was once considered a superfood long before anyone started putting chia seeds in smoothies. It was cheap, nutritious, and absolutely packed with iron. The downside? That unmistakable taste. That bold, mineral-rich flavor that either made your mouth water or made you leave the house. But the trick was always in the preparation. First, soak the liver in milk. It tenderized it, softened the flavor. Then fry it up in a pan slicked with bacon grease, because why not? That smoky, savory richness balanced out everything else. This was food that powered workdays, built generations, and reminded people that good things did not always taste sweet. You did not eat liver and onions because you wanted something fancy. You ate it because it worked. It fed you, it filled you, and it had a history you could taste. And if all of that sounded a bit heavy, do not worry. Next up is a bite-sized treat that brought color, charm, and just enough sweetness to make every party table sparkle. Ribbon sandwiches were like edible confetti, colorful, delicate, and always the first to disappear at any respectable gathering. If you were hosting a baby shower, bridge club, or Sunday tea in the 1920s, these were non-negotiable. You started with soft white bread, sliced paper thin, then stacked layers of tinted cream cheese in pink, green, or yellow, dyed gently with beet juice, spinach, or carrot. The fillings could be savory, sweet, or both. Think olive and nut, pimento and chive, or even pineapple and cream cheese. Then came the art. You'd trim off the crusts, chill the whole stack until firm, and slice them into perfect little checkerboard squares or neat spirals that looked almost too pretty to eat. Almost. They turned tea time into a mini celebration and gave leftovers a makeover. And when you placed them on a tray, alternating colors like you were arranging jewelry, people could not help but smile. Ribbon sandwiches were bite-sized beauty with just enough filling to surprise you. And just when you thought the flavors were soft and subtle, the next dish turned that right on its head, with a dressing so rich it could make even a weed taste like gold. Dandelion greens with hot bacon dressing is one of those dishes that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about salad. Yes, dandelions. The same ones kids blew into the wind are actually packed with vitamins and grew wild just about everywhere. In the 1920s, you could find people hunched over in backyards and fields, gathering them by hand. Why? Because they were free. And when money was tight, free tasted amazing. The greens were bitter, peppery, and not something you ate plain. That's where the magic came in. Hot bacon dressing, made from rendered bacon fat, vinegar, a pinch of sugar, and maybe a little onion, was poured over the greens while still warm. It wilted them just enough to soften the bite while keeping their bold flavor. It was earthy, indulgent, and just rustic enough to make you feel like you had done something clever. It also came with bragging rights. You picked your salad from your own backyard? That was next-level homemaking. But if greens were not your thing, do not worry. The next dish made waves with just 3 ingredients and a name that still makes people smile. Shrimp wiggle. Yes, that is what they called it. And no, it has nothing to do with dancing seafood. What it was, and still is for the brave, is a warm, creamy shrimp dish that somehow became the midweek hero of 1920s dinner tables. The base? A simple white sauce made from milk, flour, and butter. Then came the peas. Canned or fresh, they added that pop of color and texture. Finally, shrimp, often canned, sometimes fresh if you lived near the coast, stirred in until the sauce hugged every bite. It was served over toast points, rice, or even saltine crackers, depending on what you had lying around. The name? Some say it came from how the shrimp wiggled in the sauce, but it is more likely a bit of marketing magic. You could make it in 15 minutes flat and still feel like dinner was something special. And sometimes, that is all you need. Still, not everyone wanted creamy seafood on their plate. Some people wanted dessert, but not the heavy, sugar-drenched kind. For those folks, the next recipe offered something lighter, brighter, and oddly elegant. Cottage cheese pie might sound like something you eat as a dare, but in the 1920s, it was a lighter, everyday cousin to the rich cheesecake we know today. It was the kind of dessert you made when you wanted something sweet but not too sinful. The filling was made with cottage cheese, not cream cheese, blended with eggs, sugar, vanilla, and sometimes a touch of lemon or cinnamon. It baked up soft and smooth, like a custard with a bit of texture, and was often served with a dusting of powdered sugar or a spoonful of jam. There was a simplicity to it that made it feel almost wholesome, like something your aunt would make and insist isn't really dessert while handing you your second slice. It was the kind of thing that made its way into community cookbooks and stayed there, waiting to be rediscovered. And maybe it is time. After all, not every dessert needs to knock you out cold with sugar. But if you did want something sweeter, brighter, and built straight out of a pantry during Prohibition, you're going to love what came next. Canned peach shortcake was a miracle of timing, taste, and whatever happened to be in the cupboard that week. Fresh peaches were seasonal and perishable. But canned peaches? You could keep those golden slices on the shelf all year long, and they would still taste like summer. During the Prohibition era, when parties moved underground and grocery lists got shorter, this dessert became a standby, both because it was easy and because it felt just a little bit fancy. You started with a biscuit base. Flaky, soft, slightly sweet. Then came the syrup-soaked peaches, sliced thick and glowing like amber in the light. Top that with a scoop of hand-whipped cream or even evaporated milk whipped into submission, and suddenly you had a shortcake that could silence a room. The syrup from the can doubled as glaze, soaking into the biscuit and making it taste like something that took hours to make. But it didn't. It took 10 minutes. Canned peach shortcake was the dessert of make-it-work energy, of pie cravings and cake dreams solved with one tin and a bit of love. And after all that sweet, syrupy goodness, the next dish swung back into savory territory, with a sharp, salty twist that still tasted fresh off the vine. Stuffed tomatoes with tuna and capers were a breath of fresh air in a decade where heavy cream sauces and casseroles reigned supreme. These were not the mayo-drenched, overly sweet tuna salads of the mid-century potluck scene. No, this version was crisp, cool, and just sharp enough to wake up your taste buds. You started with ripe tomatoes, usually large and firm, and hollowed them out like little edible bowls. The filling? Flaked tuna, chopped capers, parsley, lemon juice, and a drizzle of good olive oil if you had it. Some versions added hard-boiled egg or a hint of mustard, but the core stayed the same, fresh, tangy, and balanced. It was a perfect warm-weather lunch and a way to show off those backyard Victory Garden tomatoes before that was even a thing. And it was portable too, great for picnics, light enough for tea, and somehow always gone before you expected it. But if cold salads are not your thing, do not worry. Our next dish came hot off a cast iron skillet with enough golden crust and molasses to make you forget bread ever existed. Johnny cakes with molasses butter were proof that simple food, when done right, can be unforgettable. These golden cornmeal griddle cakes dated all the way back to colonial times, but they had a real resurgence in the 1920s. Why? Because they were cheap, filling, and satisfying. No flour? No problem. Johnny cakes used cornmeal, a little salt, and hot water, mixed until thick and spread onto a hot griddle or cast iron pan. The edges crisped up beautifully while the inside stayed soft and hearty. You could eat them plain, with a smear of lard or butter, or go full-on decadent with molasses butter, made by whipping butter and molasses into a sticky, dark, sweet, salty spread that tasted like comfort in its purest form. And they lasted. Cooked in batches and wrapped in cloth, they stayed fresh for days, making them perfect for travel or long work hours. You could stack them, dip them in stews, or even crumble them into milk. They were reliable, rugged, and full of warmth. But for those who preferred their food to feel like it floated on air, our next dish quite literally rose to the occasion. Lemon snow pudding was like dessert from a dream, light, fluffy, and cool enough to tame even the stickiest summer night. This was not your average gelatin mold. This was elegance in a bowl, served chilled with a texture somewhere between mousse and magic. The base was made with lemon juice, sugar, and egg whites, whipped into stiff peaks and folded into a gelatin mixture until the whole thing looked like a cloud. It was then spooned into serving glasses or molds and set in the icebox until it quivered like it was afraid to be touched. And then you did touch it, and you never forgot it. Bright and tangy, sweet without being syrupy, this dessert walked a fine line between refreshment and indulgence. It was beautiful, it was budget-friendly, and it always made you feel like you were doing something a little fancier than usual. Even the name had charm. Lemon Snow. Sounds like something you would find at a party thrown by Jay Gatsby himself. But not every dish from the 20s was delicate. Some were built to stick to your ribs. And the next one came straight from the farmlands, with just enough spice and sweetness to become a legend. Scrapple with apple butter is one of those dishes that sparks strong opinions, especially if you are from Pennsylvania or anywhere nearby. But love it or not, Scrapple was a Depression-era favorite that packed in flavor, protein, and just enough spice to make every bite memorable. Made from pork scraps, yes, all the scraps, combined with cornmeal, flour, and spices, Scrapple was boiled, cooled, and then sliced and fried until the outside was a golden, crispy crust and the inside stayed soft and savory. It was born out of a zero-waste mentality, and the end result was way more than the sum of its parts. And then came the twist: apple butter. Sweet, spiced, homemade apple butter that turned this humble breakfast into a near-religious experience. Scrapple was often served at breakfast, alongside eggs and toast, but plenty of folks ate it for lunch or dinner too, because when food tastes this good and costs this little, you do not wait for an invitation. But now that we have tackled rich, crispy comfort food, it is only right to end with something soft, sweet, and touched by sunshine. A pie so light, it almost floated off the plate. Orange chiffon pie was like eating a slice of the breeze on a warm spring afternoon. Before chiffon cake took over the 1930s, this pie walked so it could run. Its filling was a perfect balance of whipped egg whites, orange juice, and zest, suspended in a soft, silky orange custard that melted the second it hit your tongue. The crust was often a simple graham cracker base or a baked shortbread shell, light enough not to overpower but strong enough to carry all that citrus glory. It was refreshing, clean, and not overly sweet, a rare trait in desserts of the era. And while it was definitely a special occasion dessert, it also found its way into diners, cafes, and holiday tables across the country. It represented a different kind of indulgence, the kind that made you pause after a bite and just smile. It was sunshine, sugar, and silk all in one. And in a decade known for its jazz, its speakeasies, and its roaring appetite for something new, this pie fit right in. Because the 20s did not just feed the stomach, they fed the soul. In the world of baking, there's one ancient technique that's managed to survive the test of time: sourdough. Before the convenience of commercial yeast, pioneers and settlers relied on sourdough starter to leaven their bread. This unique culture of wild yeast and bacteria created a tangy flavor while helping dough rise, and it was passed down through generations. A sourdough starter could be preserved indefinitely, as long as it was fed with flour and water, making it one of the original live foods. Historically, sourdough was essential for those who couldn't rely on quick and easy store-bought yeast. It was the bread of California gold rush miners who carried their starters through the rugged terrain to bake fresh loaves amidst the chaos. Even today, sourdough remains a beloved tradition, particularly in San Francisco, where the local climate and bacteria create a distinctive taste that can't be replicated anywhere else. Not only did sourdough provide nutritional value with its complex carbohydrates and probiotic benefits, but it was also a practical, low-maintenance food. Once established, the starter required minimal attention, making it a reliable companion for home bakers. Freezing in snow is self-explanatory, but there's actually a bit more that goes on there besides what meets the eye and what common sense would tell you up front. People relied on freezing in snow, and yes, preserving food in snow, especially meats and proteins, thanks to the insulation properties and temperature regulation, was a fantastic idea. Just some good old-fashioned human resourcefulness and ingenuity rising to the occasion. Love to see it, right? While there's not a lot to say about the scientific aspect of all of this, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to the cultural aspect. See, this became a community hobby for people that lived in predominantly cold areas, ones with long winters, or people who just lived in rural places and communities away from urban hubs and industrialization. Gathering snow, making snow caves, storing the meat properly, packing it. All of this became a tradition that was spread through families, and it honestly brought people closer together. While I get that just hearing about it in a video might not drive that point home, but if you take a look at how people were living in rural communities before refrigeration, then it's actually sweet. Kids would help out with making pockets in the snow, adults would spend their day cleaning the meat for the community, and it was all just this nice, fair division of responsibility that taught everyone to work, care for food, and gave them some neat skills. If we move on over to the kids' menu for a second, we'll find alphabet spaghetti, every boomer parent's dream food. The dish was simply canned tomato sauce pasta, but the pasta spelled out the alphabet. It's a little educational, a little tasty, and pretty cheap. Its best quality is easily that it could be paired with a number of things like toast, ham, or sausages, and you could even mix some peas and corn in there for a bit of a nutritional kick. It was a favorite for families with lots of children, And back in the day, that was pretty much every family. Hooray for Planned Parenthood, I guess. You could also serve it up plain as it is, but that was more for kids that had already acquired a finer palate, which happily included pasta. Most kids were still eating mud from the playground, really. The playful shapes and vibrant sauce weren't just meals, they were fun on a plate. Parents loved how easy it was to prepare, especially after a long day, and kids were entertained while eating. It wasn't uncommon for families to turn dinner time into a mini spelling game, laughing at the words the spaghetti created. For parents looking to stretch their budget, these cans were lifesavers. They packed enough carbs to keep growing kids full and satisfied. Plus, it made vegetables like peas and corn just a little more bearable for picky eaters. This quirky meal became a symbol of simpler times, where dinner didn't need to be fancy to be memorable. Nobody is a stranger to wraps and how they dominate the bread world as one of the best things you could do with dough or pita or whatever wrap you have. Honey mustard chicken wraps are one kind in particular that have been really popular all over America, since a lot of families grew up eating these or bringing them to school. They were one of the most commonly demanded things to eat. Everywhere you would go, there was a craze for honey mustard wraps that was hard to beat out and impossible to escape. McDonald's had their own budget-friendly versions that did amazingly well with the people too, and home chefs soon found ways to even copy that. As a result, these chicken wraps have become a regular part of the average American diet plan. Also, they just work so well since they are pretty quick to eat too and can be made pretty fast as well. If you know what you are doing, 10 minutes is all you need to assemble and have a wrap ready to go. For centuries, parched corn was a go-to survival food that could be eaten on the trail, in the fields, or stored for winter. Native Americans were among the first to master the technique of drying corn over a fire, preserving it for long-term use. As they learned to parch the kernels, they made it a staple in their diet. Simple, reliable, and portable. To prepare parched corn, the kernels were heated until they popped and hardened, allowing them to be ground into flour or eaten as a snack. This process of drying and roasting preserved the corn without refrigeration, providing a source of energy and nutrients during lean times. In addition to its practicality, parched corn played a cultural role. It was a food often shared during times of hardship, passed around in communal settings. The dried kernels were durable enough to survive long journeys and harsh conditions, making them an essential part of American frontier diets. Parched corn was once used as a currency of sorts, traded in early American settlements for goods or services. Talk about a snack that truly paid off. Beyond its simple preparation, parched corn was a lifeline during the challenging times, offering nutrients like carbs, fiber, and a bit of protein. One of the most classic street foods of all times is now coming to a supermarket near you in a can. At least, that's the branding they were going for with hot dogs. These pre-cooked bad boys were made with every kind of variation you could want to satisfy your hot dog craving. Pork fan? Got you covered. Chicken sausages, more your style? Have no fear, every can for chump change. Want to keep it strictly American and traditional with some beef? They have that too. They also doubled as party treats because you could go all out with pigs in a blanket or cocktail hot dogs. Canned hot dogs were really a part of the culture. And I don't mean that just because the first thing you think of when you hear the word American is somebody with a hot dog next to them. See, before this, hot dogs were something that were really beloved but were still something you had to either go out for or spend some time preparing and cooking. As a result, on those lazy days, they could never break past the barrier and reach real comfort food status. That was true until canned hot dogs came along and changed the entire game up. The popularity of sausage-based dishes spiked in popularity. It wasn't just hot dogs, but they definitely benefited the highest. People were having more hot dogs than ever before, and they were not being shy about their love of it either. Maybe you've been watching and thinking that so far, nothing seems particularly healthy. Like maybe a snack for you looks more like a fruit and nut oatmeal bowl, rather than mac and cheese, bites, or grilled sandwiches. We cannot blame you. Sometimes you need food that keeps the bloat down and keeps you well fed while preferably not tasting bad. A lot of people think of healthy food and immediately think that it has to taste bad, or even if it does not, it will not taste as good as it could. Fruit and nut oatmeal bowls do not work like that because of how versatile they are. Sometimes your grandma would add almonds and diced apples covered in maple syrup, while other times she'd use crushed blueberries. The template lets you do different things with it every day, so this is an easy 10-minute option you can make whenever you need something to freshen you up. Looks like we're going to be dealing with some millennia-old classics for a while. Sprouting grains is probably older than the last two combined, and it basically works as a steroid for your grains. You soak, germinate, and sprout the grains, and this does a lot for them. It activates enzymes like amylase and protease, and then they break down complex carbs, fats, and proteins. Not sure what all that means? Basically, you turn on the things that help break your food down and turn it a lot more digestible. Naturally, germination also has been known to make the vitamins that are already there in fruits even more effective. Vitamins B and C get the highest effect out of this, though the science on that one is lost to me too. Not only was sprouting grains a big idea during colonial America, but it was something that became a mainstream practice during the Great Depression and War era thanks to the way people were sharing any and all information, including long-held family traditions just to survive another day and keep their pantry going. Centuries before the invention of tortillas, tamales, or even nachos, Native American cultures were already perfecting the art of using corn in ways that made it both more digestible and more durable. The technique used was nixtamalization. By soaking and cooking corn kernels in an alkaline solution, usually lime water, the process released essential nutrients and made corn easier to grind into masa, the base for many beloved dishes. Masa isn't just any dough, it's corn transformed through fermentation, a key to both its preservation and nutritional benefits. Once treated, it could be stored for several days or dried for longer preservation, ensuring a steady food source during the harvest season. This made it the ultimate survival food long before commercial kitchens got their hands on it. Masa represented more than sustenance. It was a symbol of resourcefulness and the deep relationship between people and the land. It was the foundation of countless recipes across North and South America, linking indigenous communities across vast regions. On the other hand, pemmican is a traditional food developed by indigenous peoples of North America. They were a very ideal way to preserve meat, fat, and berries all in one for long-term storage, and it's probably one of the earliest examples we have of portable food that was put in a compact form because it needed to. It was ideal for travel, trading, and quick consumption, all factors that American industries and companies would keep in mind going forward. How does all this work, though? Bison, deer, and elk are all good sources of lean meat and were herded by indigenous peoples for a long time. All the meat from these animals would be dried, either through sun-drying it or through smoking it. In place of that, rendered fat like tallow would be mixed with the powdered dried meat, and this would seal the meat, preventing any air from interacting with it and excess moisture ruining the drying process. Berries also would contain acidic compounds and antioxidants that would help kill microbe activity overall and help reduce spoilage, and the final mix of this would be molded into cakes and balls and put into compact containers. If you made pemmican properly, it could actually last all year or even more than that, and it was packed with all kinds of nutrition that were important for a nomadic lifestyle. In short, this was a wonder food, and it was built to take care of everything you would need nutritionally. If you would bury root vegetables in the crown, then you were literally taking advantage of the natural regulation of the earth. This was a common practice that people did to keep vegetables as fresh as they could be and extend their shelf life, and it was something you'd see a lot throughout the winter. Basically, in the colder months, since the ground tends to maintain a consistently cool temperature, it helps slow the metabolic process of most vegetables down. This helps to stave off the decaying process, but the temperature of the soil during the winter is actually a lot lower than you think. It's literally just a few degrees Fahrenheit above the freezing point, and this way, not only do you get to preserve your fruit, but the overall nutritional content and texture get preserved too. Most vegetables also really need to be hydrated properly, or they'll shrivel up and die, and soil acts as a natural wellspring of moisture, so you get that covered easily. Long before root beer was a soda fountain staple, there was sassafras tea, a beverage made from the roots of the sassafras tree. Early settlers, Native Americans, and pioneers used it as a flavorful drink, but it was also cherished for its medicinal qualities. The roots were steeped to create a fragrant, slightly spicy tea that could be enjoyed hot or cold. Sassafras was easy to preserve too. The roots could be dug up and stored for later use, keeping well throughout the year. A perfect ingredient to gather when fresh herbs were out of season or when the winter cold made sourcing ingredients a challenge. It was the multi-purpose drink of its time, satisfying both the body and the spirit. Historically, sassafras tea was used to treat everything from colds to digestive issues, and even as a mild diuretic. It was a go-to for settlers looking for a home remedy when traditional medicine wasn't easily available. In fact, sassafras was so valued that it was one of the first plants exported from North America to Europe in the 1600s. Sassafras was once used in the original formula for root beer before it was banned by the FDA due to concerns over its saffrole content, a compound thought to be carcinogenic. Pineapples were starting to grow outside of Hawaii, and dare I say they built up a pretty serious fan base for themselves over the years. The PR here was insane. They went from being a fruit that people thought was only good in the summers to suddenly being featured with pizzas, sandwiches, fish, and God knows what else. You had pineapple upside-down cakes, or pineapples and ham, or even sweet and sour pork. The list was endless. This was a complete 360 from its usual position in the culture too, and it was really sudden. By the way, the 350 thing wasn't a pun, because you know the pineapples came in round 360-degree rings. Anyway, moving on. My personal theory is that the pricing and the need for cooler foods that broke away from the typical trends of savory, warm, and spicy were becoming more and more necessary. And, well, the people spoke for themselves and with their wallets. A big block to mass pineapple consumption was also that cracking one open simply took more effort than a lot of people were willing to spare for a tropical fruit they only kinda enjoyed. It's the same deal as people who don't bother with crab because it's just a pain to break open the legs to scoop a little bit of meat. Luckily, canned pineapples were the final nail in the coffin for complaints like that, because now you could just pop open a can and begin snacking away. No arrangement, tools, or slicing and dicing needed. Trying out your favorite ramen packet for the 1150th time this year for dinner? We get it, it is a pretty reliable option. Nothing hits that comfort food craving as well as ramen does. But did you know that back in the days of the early 1900s when it was not so popular, most home chefs would spice up ramen with some basic additions that are so common today that almost everybody uses it as a default now. We are talking about ramen with eggs, which is something that you may be so used to seeing in every TikTok and short reel on Insta these days, but it did not always used to be like that. Home chefs were the ones who started the trend of adding things to your ramen, spicing it up and seeing what works and what does not. We have to thank them because they definitely hit gold with it. Apple cider vinegar has been a fixture in American homes for centuries, predating refrigeration by a long shot. The process of fermentation was harnessed to create this tangy liquid that could preserve fruits, vegetables, and even meats, all while offering a sharp, zesty flavor to dishes. Early settlers knew its value beyond just culinary uses. Apple cider vinegar was an essential part of their health regimens, believed to help with digestion, fight off infections, and even serve as a general tonic for the body. In fact, it was a multitasker before multitasking was cool. For preservation, apple cider vinegar works through its acidity. High acidity levels inhibit the growth of bacteria, which is why it was commonly used for pickling vegetables and fruits, making it a pantry essential on homesteads. Canning with apple cider vinegar kept food fresh and safe without refrigeration, and as an added bonus, it gave everything a delightful punch. Nutritionally, it's packed with potassium, magnesium, and probiotics from fermentation, which supports gut health. The vinegar's practicality extended beyond the kitchen too. People used it for cleaning, for medicinal purposes, and even as a natural insect repellent. Just buying and using olive oil isn't enough. You need to also seal it properly, which can help the olive oil maintain its overall flavor. Why do you need to do this? Well, again, oxidation. Get used to it, man. We're going to be hearing a lot of it. It basically ruins the vibe of your olive oil completely because it destroys the compounds that give the oil its flavor, aroma, and health benefits, and basically means you waste your money. The fatty acids you have in your olive oil do not click well with oxygen at all. So the next question is, how do you store your olive oil properly? Now, the best thing to do is just to use an airtight container that doesn't let any kind of oxygen in. You want to ideally be using tight-fitting lids or glass bottles with tight caps. Tin over plastic is also pretty okay. You'd want to store the olive oil in a tin container though. The best thing is actually to get a dark container because this is the lesser-known fact about olive oil. Light, well, more so, the UV rays in light actually help to degrade olive oil by making oxidation a lot easier. You want to ideally store your olive oil in containers with dark colors that can limit the amount of light exposure it gets. Have you ever noticed how people have dark green jars and usually store their olive oil in small quantities? Yeah, now you know why? Deviled ham is pretty much exactly what you're used to seeing. The finest ham you've ever seen in a can, minced to perfection and blended with just the right amount of mustard, spices, and seasonings. You can make sandwiches out of this or use it as a spread, but beyond that, it's not really something you could do too much with it. It's one of those canned foods that doesn't really have much in terms of variety, but does excel at what it does, so we'll give it a pass. You could get it for 20 cents or just a few more, but if you really wanted ham heaven in a can, then the obvious pick was Underwood. This was arguably the most dominating brand and helped every grocery store drive its sales up for the month. Not to mention, it was responsible for a lot of ham sandwiches. People swore by its versatility, often packing it into school lunches or smearing it on crackers for an easy appetizer at home parties. Deviled ham's spicy kick gave it a unique edge, making it a favorite for picnics and road trips too. Housewives appreciated how long it lasted on the shelf, giving them a quick fix for surprise guests or after-school snacks. And who could forget the iconic devil logo on the packaging? It became a recognizable staple in American households, a small but satisfying indulgence that offered the flavor of home-cooked ham without all the effort. You know how boomers love a good low-effort food. Deviled ham may not have been the star of gourmet cuisine, but it was undeniably a reliable classic. What's your favorite flag? If you have any appreciation for colorful ones, then you will like caprese salads, which end up having all the colors of Italy's flag. This is an Italian dish that is really popular as a starter as well as a snack that has been passed down through families, after all. People love adding cheese to everything, which is something we are sure you are well aware of by this point living in America. Caprese salads involve sliced mozzarella, fresh basil, and tomatoes, and it is typically arranged beautifully. Well, that is if you get it at a fancy Italian joint, but if you were having this at your grandma's place, then it was a big bowl with a lot more cheese than they put in those kitchens. It really made the salad a lot better too, even if it was not as good for weight control anymore. Caprese salads are something you should try when you get sick of the regular French and Caesar salads. You might just find a new favorite. As far as your dairy needs go, condensed canned milk was right up there with regular old chocolate milk. People would grab a bottle or can on their way to work for a quick drink to freshen up their mood, and it would work every time. Lots of happier dentists in that era too. Typically you got these in 14-ounce cans, but the best part was that it didn't really require refrigeration, which wasn't exactly too common during the time of boomers. Some of the best brands to buy from were Borden's or Elsie the Cow. Actually, they were pretty much the only brands to buy from. Any store would have Borden's face front and other brands stacked in the back, which is ever so subtle, but the message was loud and clear. So, it looks good, it costs nothing, and it tastes awesome, but what's it actually made out of? Well, this milk was made by taking out a bit more than half of the water from the whole milk and then adding sugar to preserve it. You got some pretty rich milk that way, but no one was really buying this just to drink raw milk, even if that was part of it. The thing is, this made baking so much easier since you had good fresh milk closer to you than ever before. You no longer needed to buy whole milk from one shop. Everyone could just go to whatever store was nearest for them and get to make whatever they wanted. lemon meringue pies, or cookies. Whatever you'd need was suddenly so much easier. It goes a long way towards awakening people to their inner chef when you give them almost MasterChef levels of access to good ingredients. Before modern preservation techniques, dried mushrooms were a go-to pantry staple for families looking to extend their food supply. Whether in the European countryside or early American homesteads, mushrooms were carefully harvested, sliced, and dried to be used during the long winter months when fresh produce was scarce. A method as old as time, the process was simple. Dry them in the sun or over low heat, sealing in flavor and nutrients. Dried mushrooms were an essential part of many cultures' diets. In Europe, they were used to enhance stews and soups, adding an earthy depth of flavor. In Native American traditions, they were also cherished, often integrated into hearty dishes and relied upon for sustenance during colder months. Over time, dried mushrooms became an important culinary ingredient across the globe. Nutritionally, these mushrooms pack a punch. Full of antioxidants, vitamin D, and essential minerals, they provide health benefits that extend beyond their flavor. Surprisingly, they can even help boost your immune system, giving your body a little extra defense in the colder seasons. Now, you've probably heard your grandmother emphasize the importance of always keeping your pasta dry. But have you ever thought about why that is? The thing with drying pasta is that besides just avoiding basic issues like how it clumps together, becomes the worst thing ever to eat, and just loses its freshness, you really just want to preserve pasta because of one simple concept: moisture content. Like we've discussed before, moisture is something that bacteria and mold need desperately to grow. If they don't get it, they're liable to have a breakdown, figuratively and literally. This is why drying pasta has been such a tradition in Italian culture and just about everywhere that popularly consumes it. Drying your pasta reduces the water content by a good 15%, and that helps the pasta achieve a much higher shelf life. I'm talking months, and if you really know how to preserve, then even years. Don't believe me? Trust me, there's an Italian on YouTube with an essay on it. Before refrigeration, preserving meat was an art, one that involved drying, salting, and smoking. Smoked meats, particularly smoked duck breast, were a favorite among early Americans and indigenous peoples. Smoking meat over a low fire for hours or even days not only imparted a rich flavor, but also preserved it for months, making it an essential part of survival in pre-refrigeration days. The process of smoking involves both curing and drying the meat, creating a barrier to bacteria and spoilage. While today we might reach for a quick snack, early settlers smoked meats for their practical, long-term storage abilities. They didn't have refrigerators, but had a smoky solution that worked wonders. Culturally, smoked meats were as much a tradition as a necessity. Smoked duck, for example, could be eaten on its own, mixed with grains, or used in soups. The rich, savory flavor made it a favorite during celebrations and in everyday meals. It was a symbol of the resourcefulness and ingenuity of the past. From a nutritional standpoint, smoked duck breast offers protein and essential fats, ideal for sustaining energy levels. As goofy as this name sounds, and please bear with me because I really can't say Spork and Spiff without chuckling, it was actually a legit idea for an afternoon lunch. Before that, though, let's get into what it is. Spork is basically just canned processed pork, and beef is exactly the same. But beef? I want whoever named these to win some kind of award. I'm not even sure if there's a category for best product names out there, but if there is, this guy should win. Luckily for this, the name wasn't the only thing it had going for it. It was really a lot like Spam, and it was affordable, easy to take around with you in your bag, and even easier to prepare since it was all pre-made. We're going to go into it in detail later, but this was really similar in texture and taste to Spam, just minus the tropical elements. It was a shelf staple. If you had a can of this and 2 slices of bread, you could pretty much make a sandwich today. See all those 10-step sandwich recipes on TikTok that ask you to go get a giant loaf of bread? Out with that, in with this. Bring back convenient sandwich making. Plus, Spiff and Spork were really good because they were so versatile. It was even a competitor to Spam because you could pretty much pair this with any classic breakfast or dish that was typical for Americans and get to eating. It was a great way to liven up some meals that were otherwise good but had gotten pretty monotonous thanks to being such regular mainstays at American tables. Spiff was definitely the better option for families though, since it was a mix of beef and pork sometimes as well. You could make some banger casseroles off of this. If one of these recipes brought back a memory or made you hungry in the best way, drop us a comment with your favorite, hit that like button like it owes you dinner, and subscribe so you never miss a taste of the past.